All right, welcome everyone to week 2 of Suffolk Lit Lab's Document Assembly Line Bootcamp. We've been working on naming conventions in the documentation. So just to be clear, that's a bootcamp is not the proper noun of the, yeah, we had all sorts of things about, should we capitalize this? Anyhow, welcome. I'm just gonna give you a quick overview of what today is gonna look like, and then we'll dive right in. So first up, we're going to frame things and talk to you a little bit about Kanban or Kanban. I'm never quite sure how to pronounce it. How we use a tool called Trello in the assembly line. We're going to introduce everyone to that tool, and then specifically how we've been using it by modeling it using the sample forms we did last week and the work we did there. And we're going to invite everyone to join our Trello board that we've set up specifically for the boot camp, so that we can literally sort of all be on the same page. So we'll do that. And then after we do that, Quentin's going to give us some insight into sort of simple Docker simple things that might have been things you want to do after you've got your thing through the Weaver. And then we're going to spend about the last half of our time together actually breaking into breakout rooms and working on the forms that you had previously in the homework session run through the Weaver. So that'll be your chance to, if you have questions, you're running into errors, that you'll be able to do that, and we'll help to try to troubleshoot those in real time in a bunch of breakout rooms. So that'll be fun. And we're also going to try to, so that the things you're going to need today is you're going to need a web browser that's going to be able to access Trello and your playground on our DocAssemble server. You're going to need Zoom. And you should also have Teams open, because one of the things we're going to do, since you can't have full group chats when you're off in a bunch of breakout rooms, we'll keep the Teams channel as a place where we'll watch things so that people can have discussions between rooms. And that'll help us if we need to escalate something, someone's having a particular problem. We can get it to someone who will be able to answer it, even if they're distributed around the rooms. So that's my first bit to say. If you don't have, so does everyone actually still, did everyone actually successfully get a Teams account last week? If not, I'm gonna suggest that you chat, direct message Bryce. I do it myself, but I'm about to talk. You can direct message Bryce and try to troubleshoot to get that. The other thing is, we know some of you have Trello accounts. I think I added like Amanda and Matt because I knew what their Trello accounts were. But other people, we didn't want to assume that your Trello account was the account that you had given the email for Teams. So if you have a Trello account, you're going to want to use that. If you don't have a Trello account, you're going to want to sign up for one. Bryce included a link in the email blast out to folks before this, but maybe Bryce, you could throw another link in the Zoom chat and in the Teams chat. So because you'll want that, because we're going to be following along with some stuff there too. All right, bookkeeping done, right? All right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, here is the bootcamp documentation that we've talked about before. You can find this in the Teams up at one of the tabs, and this is where you can go to. For example, here's a video from our first session. So if you go there, you can go and see our video from the first session. You can also see internal links to bits of the documentation, like a discussion of how to use the Weaver, all there laid out from what we talked about last week. This week, we're going to go ahead and we're going to, as I previewed for you, we're going to talk about a tool called Trello. And you can get to the boards that I'm going to reference here. You can get to them by clicking on these links here. When it's appropriate time, we'll also provide a link in the Teams channel. What I'm going to do now is just open it up by way of introduction. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and I'm going to look at one of our old boards. And what I'll do is this. You guys get to see all the fun. You don't need to worry about navigating what I'm doing now. I'm just doing this as a way to show things off. I wanted to show you a board that's not the one that you're going to be using, but is a board that we're using on another part of the project as a way to sort of give you an explanation of what we're talking about. So Trello is a tool which we use internally. We have a template set of what these are called boards, which you can copy for your own organization. So our expectation during the boot camp is we're all going to work on a set of common boards together on whatever form you're running through the board. Then after that, if you liked how that process worked, you're going to be able to duplicate that board for your own organization, and then you can run your own workflow that way. This is an instantiation of something called Kanban or Kanban. Like I said, I never know how to pronounce that. That's what you get when you learn all your things by reading. You never know how to pronounce things. I don't know. This is really hard because there's no feedback whatsoever. I think Jack should unmute and then laugh occasionally at my jokes. I knew I could count on you, Jack. But the Kanban is a system that's developed. It often gets tied together in discussions of agile workflow. This isn't really a project management class, but just to give you some context, the basic idea is that what you're doing is it's a way for you to help visualize where your work is. It was created by folks at Toyota to help work actually on a real assembly line. So it's actually kind of interesting that now we're using it on the assembly line project, but it has been adopted rather widely as something in software development. And the basic idea is that you have tasks or things that you want to do, and you assign those cards, and each one of these little things is a card, right? And the nice thing is you can move these cards across these columns. And so the idea is that sort of workflow flows from left to right. So you'll start off maybe with, traditionally you'd have something called a backlog, which is sort of all the features or things you want to work on in a giant big pile off on the left. And then you would take them, and as certain tasks were done, you would move them from one column to the next. We have two main types of columns here. We have columns where something's happening and columns that are buffers. So basically, if you see a card in a column, and you don't need to know what all these mean yet, we'll talk about that in response to our thing. If you see a column here that has a real name here and doesn't say buffer, then that means that this thing is being worked on. For our purposes, we've assigned each form or each work process that you're trying to automate a card. So here you can see the adult guardianship interview is in the code interview column. That means that it's being coded right now. If you see something over in a buffer, that means it's done with whatever process was to the left of it, but waiting to start the process to the right. And then what you can start to recognize is that as a project, I can, so for example, I can, I'm interfacing with my Zoom windows are all over things. But here's this notion of, you can start to see where the work piles up. So we can see, for example, that there's a lot of things that are being worked on reviewed by an SME that's a subject matter expert, and there's a lot of people working on code. When you're working on an assembly line or a large group project, this ability to visualize where bottlenecks are occurring in your workflow helps you to allocate resources to clear up those bottlenecks. That was one of the main motivations behind the development of this as a system. Trello is just a tool for making this happen. A lot of people, when they do this, make it very simple. There's backlog, to do, and then done, right? So there's like all the things you want to do someday, the things you're working on right now, and the things when they're done. We have added layers of complexity to that to sort of do a lot of things. And one of the things I want to do right out of the gate before we jump into describing these in detail is to remind folks that what we're presenting here, we want you to take it and riff on it. While we're working on the boot camp, we'll go through and we'll follow all the steps as we're going through the boards. But we're going to present you with some boards. They're going to have things like checklists on them, and those things are more guides than sort of dogma. So the idea is we have intentionally made them more robust than you would actually want to use them, maybe when you copy over into your own work, because it's the first time you're going through. So we're using them not just to help you check things off, but also to provide some context. So you'll see in the checkbox in our to-do list, you also see links out to documentation, etc. The idea there is that you can prune these down. It's easier to prune things, delete things away than it is to add things in if you don't have the context. So I don't want anyone to feel overwhelmed by looking at all these columns and seeing all these checklists that we're going to see in a minute, because the idea is that we're really trying to trying to give you a tool that you can then prune and adapt for yourselves later, but also make it very concrete with the examples we're running through the bootcamp. All right, that being said, what we're gonna do now is make this a little more concrete, and Michelle is gonna help us out here. And what she's gonna do is she's gonna set us off by looking at this first pre-processing board. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take that link and I'm gonna drop that in the Zoom chat to everyone and also in the bootcamp on the Teams channel to everyone. And then what Michelle can do is she can take us away, and I'm going to drive, so I'll keep sharing my screen. She's going to give me direction and give you guys context as we go through an example form, which is here's the generic motion that we made last week. And so I'll open this up, and Michelle, take us away.
Thanks, David. So we've pre-made this card that can be copied over and over again. That kind of comes pre-built, pre-cooked, and we've cooked this one even more. And we have these spaces at the top ready for you to slot in your information. So as the administrator, when you, never mind, we'll get to that later. Sorry, you would come in and put in the stuff that is going to be persistent on every card, but we'll continue with the individual process.
Yeah, I think a thing that's nice to make clear is that right now this is a form we're going to look at that has things checked off. This is also a template. This is from a template, and you're all going to make a card from this template in a moment.
You'll get your own copy. So so if we scroll down, we scroll to the first card, and we see that's called first checklist. And we have a lot of checklists, folks, but we have found that to be an incredible tool in helping people just slot in and move through the process. So the 1.0 buffer column is where you can put forms that are just being started. And you open the card and you move it over and you check off the checklist items. It just says, make a card, move it over to the next column. Thanks, David. So the next card is going to have some checklist items as well. And we've actually gone through a lot of these. And you can see David just hid those checklist items. You hover over the hide, right? The hide button, there you go. That can really close these down as you get further and further down, because it does take some scrolling after a while. But so you can see we went through the items like, you know, adding yourself to the card, editing the card description to add a link to the original form, downloading the form, et cetera, renaming it, all that kind of stuff. And as you go, you can continue checking things off. Go ahead, David. Yep. And you can complete them, and then you move it to the 1.2 buffer when you're done. When you're done with that checklist, you check off that item and you move it to the 1.2 buffer. And you continue on through this process. Sometimes you'll split off into different paths. For example, here there's a PDF versus a docx. Now we did a PDF, so now we can delete the docx checklist. And as we work our way through the PDF process, this describes just what y'all went through last time and how we use the weaver and use the labels. And you can also then delete the forking path there, you know, 1.3b. And you will have choices like that. Okay, and so and we'll go through a few more of these. Where we actually are is board 2. So we'll get to board 2. I'm trying to remember if,
yeah, I'll just move it here for us.
So you can just move it by hitting that button and selecting another board that you belong to. As long as you belong to a board, you can move a card to there. Go ahead. Yeah.
And then to navigate between your boards, you can click up here on boards. If you only have a couple, they'll be the only ones you see. I've gone ahead and favorited the boards we're dealing with today, so I can get to them very easily.
All right. So now we're in the buffer of 2.0, and we've tried to break up this process. That was all the pre-processing. Oh, nice. You got confetti
for something.
Yeah.
We have free special tools for maybe the remainder of 2 more weeks.
And these this Trello board, some Trello like powers you need to pay for or get some kind of credits for, but this is all done with a completely free Trello board. So this should be accessible to you right away.
And Michelle, could you explain why we have differences between, why do we move from one board to another? What's the division we made between boards there?
So one thing is the division between lists, which I think is important. We've tried to, lists are those columns. Lists are what Trello calls those columns. So each list and each checklist is supposed to be a place at which you can easily pick up the card and move it to the next one. It's supposed to be a contained unit. And the boards are separate parts of the process. So board one is the pre-processing, getting your form all prepared for coding, for generating and coding. And board two is where we jump when we're done generating, which is to start developing the code of the form. And then board three will be the testing board, where it gets confirmed that things are working as expected and as they should be. So we went through the step of generating code, but we did not upload a YAML file. So that's an item we can delete. We can just delete that item, get rid of that, and we're done with that.
Yeah, and that's because that was contingent. It said either upload the package or in a other circumstance, upload the YAML file. And you guys all created packages last week. And so we're trying to replicate what we had been through last week.
Yeah. So now we're going to skip. We're going to come back to these checklist items, but for the purpose of the workshop, we're going to skip connecting to GitHub, and we're going to skip identifying requirements for our form. And we're going to skip ahead to edit and write code, but we can come back to these columns later when it's more appropriate. And this is sort of now you draw the rest of the OWL part of the process. Where it takes some more, in-person guidance to learn how to code in DocAssemble, how to use the tools at your disposal. So I think, is there anything I missed?
I think that catches the stuff we wanted to cover at this stage. I think what we'd like to do is we hope that everyone can leave today with having created I know one thing that we want to do. We want to show you how to create.
How to clone it, yes. So this is the task we're going to set for you guys for the next couple minutes. Go to board one, that link to board one.
And so this is the link that I just gave everyone in the 2 chat spaces.
Click on the form name type of law. Nope. Oh, I see.
No, yeah, let's do that. Let's do the, yeah, oh yeah, well, there are
okay, because I click on the copy template card, but okay, yeah.
Yeah, you can either, there are many ways, right? You could copy, or you could just click on create from template, and then you can choose the template you want. And then this is one of the first checklist items. You could actually create the card without doing this, because you can come back and change the title. So I'll just go ahead and create the card. We're going to keep the checklist. Those are all those checklists we had. And I can now see everyone's card coming online. Now the key thing is you've got to find your card, the one you just created. So jump that maybe we should have had you name it something first, but then find yours, jump in. You can add yourself to the card then when you're here by just hitting the space bar. And of course, I'm going to get spinning beach ball of death. I don't know if you see that in the screen share.
And the text in here in general, if you click on some text, you'll be able to edit it. If you can click on the description text. Again, I'm not sure people caught that.
And you can see it joined me here when I hit the space bar, and then my icon showed up on the card there. And then now the thing I might want to do is, and we can see other people joining.
Description, but
yeah, I didn't actually put a description, but I can either change my name here, have my card, and I can say, so you would name this for whatever form you did. So, whatever it was you did for your homework last week. And then if everyone sort of gets this card done, then what you can start to do is you can go through and you can say, oh yeah, I did all these things. Boom, 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 boom. And then appropriately move your card. I don't think we're going to take all the time. I think it looks like people are doing pretty well at creating their cards. So I don't think we're going to take too much time here making you go through, read through the checklists. and then move your card to the appropriate spot. But
I'll mostly just create them this time.
yeah, but if you
sorry,
go ahead, Michelle.
David.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to once again say, as you go through these checklists, as you get familiar with them, you can change them, adjust them, edit them, delete items as appropriate for your organization and your circumstance. So just wanted to emphasize that there's a lot there, but it really just depends on what your team needs.
You might already have been about to say this, but one limit to keep in mind is when you edit the checklist, it doesn't update them on cards that have been copied from the template. So look at it before you make a bunch of cards, or be ready to edit the checklist card by card, which is not really a big burden, but something to keep in mind.
And then, as I sort of previewed, our expectation is that for the boot camp, we're all going to work on these 3 boards using this template checklist that you've just created. And then at the end of the boot camp, one of the other things you can do is you can copy the entire boards, including the template checklist. And then you'd have your own copy, and you could edit them however you like, however is appropriate for your organization, and then use that in your own workflow.
Yeah.
And I think that's, oh, do we get, I think we might have copied an entire column. Not quite sure what happened there.
So good experimentation.
Yeah. All right. So we seem to have copied the list. I'm just going to archive this second list that popped up because we now have 2 1.1 buffers. Hopefully I'm going to
1.0.
yeah, 1.0. Hopefully I'm going to delete the one that not everyone's in.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yes, please.
I'm trying to make the card, but for some reason it posts to the mass access pre-processing board, even though I'm on the boot camp board.
Oh, did you?
It's oh, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask where you created from. Did you use the create from template here on this board, on the pre-processing?
So yeah, I'm on the pre-processing boot camp, and the only thing I see I'm able to do is like copy and paste.
Oh,
and when I do that,
yeah. So we should be clear when you come here. One of the things you'll want to do is click. There should be a thing up here for join, and you want to make sure you join this board before you're able to do things. I bet it's probably because you're joined to the other board and haven't joined this board yet. It's my guess.
sorry, can you go over how to join it?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I was realized I wasn't sharing my screen anymore, so moving my cursor around was entirely pointless. Up here, where you see all these people, I don't see it now because I'm already part of the board, but there should be something that says join, right?
It's where invite is right now. That's where it will be. It says join board.
So click that first, and then once you've joined the board, you should be able to do more than just copy.
I don't have a join button.
Have you been added as a member to the board?
No, I'm not on here.
To the team?
Are you logged into Trello?
Yes.
All right. If you feel comfortable, you could we could share your screen and try to troubleshoot. If not,
Sure.
That's fine too.
Sure.
It could help to join through the invite link in the chat. I think that's how I got to the invite.
So like up here, it's here, but like I can't.
Okay, well, yeah. So we'll go all the way over to the buffer, 1.0.
Okay.
And scroll all the way down to the bottom where you're going to want to create a new card.
Yeah,
I think
you can't. Yeah, no, you can't.
I think the problem is that she's not a member of the team. I think we need your Trello user account or your email address if you can send that to one of us. So maybe today.
I'm actually not sure because you should be able to join the card without joining.
It's public, correct?
It is public.
Yeah. So I'm just going to get the link, the invite link for this board, and I'm just going to put it directly in there. It's in the Zoom,
chat.
And I'll also put it in the.
Thanks, Eduardo.
Okay, maybe that could be it because I already had the I forgot what it's called, but like the outline of the course and everything. So I just clicked.
Oh, you just clicked there.
Yeah. So maybe that's it.
I don't know. Try that link. This is the joy.
Oh yes, it says. Yep. Now it says.
All right. Now you hopefully by joining that board, you will now have joined. I'm not sure actually if that joins you to the team automatically. If it doesn't, then we'd actually have to send out that invite link for each of the boards.
No, that time it said that David invited me for this board when I clicked the link from the actual chat. So I don't know.
Okay, cool. I'm going to just make sure in case. And I'm just going to get what I'm going to do is I'm going to get to create the team link, and because I just invited you, I wasn't thinking, I just invited you to that one board, which then there are 2 other boards. So now I'm putting the team link in both of them. And that should get you to the team, which then you should then be able to see the link to join. So to avoid that problem with future boards, there's just the one team link. And obviously, if other people were already able to join, then cool. And I think that we had scheduled 30 minutes for that. So I think we hit that just right. So let's just really quickly make sure that people are sort of literally and figuratively on the same page here. Was everyone now, with the addition of the invite link, able to get on the Trello and create a form, a card?
And we can also troubleshoot this later in individual groups if anyone's still having trouble.
But it looks like we've got, well, if I just look, we've got. Hi,
I had a question. How do I assign myself to the board? I labeled it, but I wasn't able to like get the little.
So there are two ways. Here, I'm going to share my screen again. So first way is here. I'm going to, whoever it's mine, I'm going to come in here with you, Jonathan. If I'm in the card open like this and I hit the space bar, it adds me. Okay, that was just me hitting the space bar. I'm going to remove myself from the card and show you the other way. The other way is I can go here and I can go add to card members. And then the first suggestion is probably yourself. And then you can add yourself that way. Or I think there's actually a third way, which is that if you're here at the card itself, you can go here and you can change members and add there as well, and then save. So those are 3 different ways to add yourself to the card. And that obviously helps you see who's working on the card at any one time. So if you're, from a project management standpoint, you're looking at, sort of like what we were showing before, which was like the big, a whole bunch of cards on here. You can see where people are bottlenecking. One of the key things about Kanban that is supposed to happen is you're supposed to have your cards be sort of a weighted amount of work per card. And you're only supposed to keep so much work on the board at any one time that's not sort of in the backlog of things to do. So that usually translates into like you only keep, X number of cards on the board at any one time. And that's to deal with your capacity that you have. But you also, with these buffers, we have this way that they could just sit in the buffer and they could just remain there until someone can pull them. But the idea is that the card, since we've sort of assigned it to forms, obviously some forms are more complicated than others, they really do let you visually see where the bottleneck is. So you can see if all the forms are piling up under review, then you need more reviewers. If it's piling up in coding, then you can go in and you can say, well, do people need more help knowing how to do that? And then there are other things which you'll see further down the line in regards to testing, et cetera. And you can really get that nice spot visual. And then the one thing you're always trying to do in the project is not to duplicate work anywhere. So the card also then becomes a record of the work that has been done on that form. So some of the things that it asks you to do is upload copies of the original template form, whether it be a PDF or a docx. So someone could come there and they could read that card and know everything they needed to know about the work being done on it. As we tie these things to GitHub, you'll realize there on GitHub, that's where we'll keep like items to do like punch lists that you want to work on. But now we're 3 minutes over our scheduled time, which I don't think is too bad. So I think this is probably the right amount of questions. I'm sure there are remaining questions, but it looks like people at least met that threshold of being able to get here, make a card. You can explore the checklist on your own. You're sort of left as an exercise to the viewer is to take your form now, the card you've made, work through it and move it to the place where you are now, which we're all sort of probably around that 2.7 place. I mean, this is not for you to do right now. I don't want you competing with what we're about to do, but that's the thing to do at some point. And that'll help give you some context. All right, Michelle, anything I missed? All right.
Nope,
then,
it's fine. The template card is gone, but I will get a new template card in there.
Okay. Yeah, and that's the other nice thing is all these products save things, or we have copies of things. So you don't have to worry about breaking anything. So feel free to play around. So don't feel bad about that. We can fix anything. As I like to tell my kids when they knock over a structure or something, I'm like, if you built it, you can rebuild it. So don't worry about breaking anything. All right, Quentin.
All right. So just launch into what we're going to do the rest of the time today and just give a little overview. We kind of went over the Trello piece, and just the outline that we had in mind for the rest of the day is flexible, but we're going to do a little bit of time playing around with docassemble now and doing some of the coding and reworking for your form. That's going to be where, honestly, as far as like those columns representing a discrete amount of work, it is probably where a lot of the work will happen, which maybe we can figure out a way to break that into multiple lists, but we haven't yet. Then we're going to do some breakout rooms, and we'll try to give as much time as we can for those. We've made the choice to not record those. So what we're hoping everyone can do when we get to the breakout room stage is to have someone who's designated to keep track of the cool thing that you learn, or the problem that you solve, or the problem that you didn't solve that you want more help with. So we can do a little bit of report back from that and have that be the part that we record and people can engage with later when they review this video. As Michelle kind of presaged there, this is kind of the draw the rest of the OWL stage of the class, and we're only going to give about 30 minutes to it, so there's plenty of time for breakout rooms. And so because of that, I want you to think about some of the other resources that you have to keep learning later. So the number one thing is this is another place where you can try things and break them, and you won't really break anything. Anything that we'll figure out how to adapt to it if it's something like that affected things on the server level, but I'm not expecting that. Some other ways to keep learning, look at examples. So we'll try to give you a place to see example code, and be aware that our project has evolved over time. So sample code from 9 months ago may not give the same lessons that sample code from a week ago would give you, but there's a lot of information on the docassemble documentation, which is the next big point. I'm going to show you in a minute how to use the documentation and some of the places to look for things, because there's a lot of it and it can be hard to navigate. Ask questions. So I want to encourage you to use the bootcamp in Teams. I know that's probably the first and most comfortable place for folks to ask questions, but you can also use the docassemble Slack, and the link to the docassemble Slack is on our bootcamp page. So it will jump you to the place where you can join the docassemble Slack environment and have one more app that you can keep running on your phone or your desktop if you don't already have any other Slack accounts. All right, so that is kind of just the overview part of what we're going to do today. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And what I'd like us to start with today is to keep working on that form that we started a little while ago. So close this window here. All right. And we're going to start with the generic motion family law form. For those of you who don't have that handy in your playground already, I'm going to show you how to get to that package and upload it to your server, your playground rather. So I'm going to go on to Teams, I go to the bootcamp channel. If you have more than one team, Microsoft Teams likes to do this thing where it doesn't let you navigate to the teams until you do a bunch of clicks. So I'm going to click on Teams here. Then I'm going to click on the team, Legal Innovation and Technology Lab. You might have to click that Teams button twice. That's what if it shows you a more narrow list of teams to start out. And then you're going to go to the the bootcamp channel. And files. And download this file here that Bryce uploaded last week, which is where we had left off essentially with the generic motion form. Okay, so when I have that form downloaded to my computer, I will then be able to go into my playground, which I get to by clicking on my name. Once I've logged in, I click on my name and I go to playground from the menu. Let me just show you what that looks like again. It'll jump you right here to whatever you had in progress last. I go to folders and packages. And I'm going to upload that form, which is just right here in the top of my list. All right, so I'm gonna let everybody take a minute to do that. And then let's just take a look at our form and see, we're gonna start running it and see how we go about deciding what to change, how to find what we wanna change, and some of the techniques that you're gonna use to change your form that the Weaver itself doesn't handle, but you are going to run into it and want to do once you start developing and customizing your form. So our philosophy with the Weaver is to really get you very quickly to that bad first draft stage, or you think of this as the paper prototype kind of level of your form. You will require some customization, and the constraints of the graphical environment are such that we just drop right down to the code at that point. So it is a big leap where you're going to customize the work. If you've had a chance to go through the week 0 materials, this will look pretty familiar, but this is a place where it's easy to get stuck. And this is the place where there's going to be the most learning and working, the most running into error messages that you haven't seen before, and the most that you'll have to just engage yourself into working and iterating through things. A rule of thumb I want to remind people about again is don't feel like you have to do something on your own. We try to encourage folks in our classes and on the bootcamp assembly line project to ask for help when they've tried something for about 30 minutes. And if you've gone through some of those processes of looking at the documentation, looking at other examples, and experimenting with what you have available to you without asking for help, that's great. But if you've tried something and you're stuck and you ask for help, we might have an answer that takes just a minute for us to give you. And you'll be able to work on a more interesting problem once you've reached out and asked for that help. All right, so here we are in the playground. As a reminder, again, let's just do a little quick orientation of what the different parts of the playground are. We already used the folders menu here. You'll see that there are a couple of different menu options. We can go to packages, which is where we uploaded our full package, which was the template and the YAML file. We can go to the templates folder. And you can see if I wanted to fix something about my PDF, I can download a copy here. I can edit it in something like Document or Acrobat, whatever tool I needed to use. And then I could upload a new copy of that. And that's going to override the copy that gets used by my interview. I don't have to run it through the Weaver again if I make a change to the PDF, or docx if you're working on a docx. I don't have to change anything, do anything from scratch. I can just upload the revised version right here. Those three folders are where you're going to spend the most time. And next week, we'll show you the packages folder again in the context of working with GitHub. There are also these other folders, which I'll just describe really quickly. So static files is where you might upload things like pictures, images that you want to include inside a screen. The sources folder is for things like spreadsheets or other files that contain data that you want to use in your interview. And then modules is for custom Python code, which is something we definitely won't cover during this class. Let's take a minute to look at this YAML file that we had created through the Weaver and just get a little familiar with the structure and nature of how it's set up. So at the top here, we have a statement that's called include. And we're including two packages here. We're including the assembly line package and this one called the mass access package. In week 3, we're going to also cover how to customize that so that it has things that talk about your organization's needs and not Massachusetts Mass Access Project. Next, we get to a section which is called metadata. We see things like a title, and this makes some sense here, hopefully. This tag here is the tag from NISME v2 or list, the taxonomy. And then we have a section we're going to just kind of scroll over, which has a bunch of, I'm seeing some message on the chat, but I guess if someone let me know if there's anything that we need to respond to that isn't being answered on the chat itself. And we see a bunch of other of these small code sections. And where I really want you to start paying attention to is these two blocks. This is where we're going to make the first set of changes. The first one is this block that has an ID that starts with the words main order. And the second is this block here, the interview order block. It starts with ID interview _ order. Those are two blocks that we've created, and those basically are the outline of your interview. This first one, you're not going to change a lot. The main order block is one that has a bunch of set in stone things for the most part. But this interview order block is where you can do things like control the order of questions, control things that happen that you want to run once, like maybe your interview interacts with an API to do something in the background. You would trigger that here in this block too. If anybody has used something like HotDocs, in HotDocs, at least the way that I've learned to do that, you have the interview computation. This is kind of that equivalent. This is where you control what in HotDocs you display dialogues. We don't display dialogues in that. That's not the way we manage logical flow in DocAssemble, but it's essentially that equivalent. Okay, so we've gotten a little bit of familiarity. I'm going to go down a little bit more and show you some of this other thing. You see here we have individual question blocks. You know they're question blocks because they have the word question in them. And towards the end here, you will see an attachment block. That's what controls the information that gets assigned to the different fields of your PDF if you're working in a PDF. It's much shorter if you're working in a docx file. You wouldn't have this whole field statement if you're working on a docx. And then we have this review screen block too, which was generated automatically. And that is where you can edit your answers over time. DocAssemble is linear. It's not like HotDocs where you navigate back and forth between different screens. You really do use, you have to trigger an action and say what you want to edit. And you can play around with that and we'll get to see what that looks like a little bit later. That's really all of the navigation of the file I want to go over. There's some links in the documentation on the bootcamp page that will help you get more of a sense of what those different blocks do and how they work. I want to show you now how to navigate the documentation. So one place that you can always get to the documentation is from this view documentation button in the playground itself. Another way to learn how to do different things is by scrolling through these example blocks. And there aren't the example blocks for everything, but there are for a lot of different things. So let's say I wanted to, for example, ask a question that involved somebody's email. This shows you how to actually send an email to somebody using code. A lot of the question type things that you're going to work with the most are really here under fields. Okay, so if I had an email address field I wanted to trigger, I could go to that example block and look at it. I could run it. I think we experimented with this last week, and I can click the view documentation. And the reason why I want to show you the example blocks as well is that view documentation button is going to be contextual. It's going to jump you right to the place where there's more discussion of that example. If you are just going to the documentation and there's something that you think you should be able to do that is not in those example blocks, which is going to happen, they're probably example blocks for about 25% of the features you can do in DocAssemble, if that. You're going to go to this page on the documentation which is labeled setting variables. And you'll see here, there's a lot of information about different kinds of data types, different kinds of screens and questions you can create. And there's a lot of information about how to modify those and to customize them. This is also where you can learn more about review screens and how to edit your answers. Okay, so this is going to be a place where you spend a lot of time. is with this setting variables page. Another place where you might do some looking around and digging around is going to be the functions page here. Functions are little bits of code that can modify the way that things look or what they do. They're functions for things like making your text bold or capitalized. And there's a lot of other functions which do more esoteric things. Formatting dates is something you might have a use for and need for pretty early. So here's where you could learn more about that. When you start doing more complicated things in DocAssemble, there's an area on this page that is called recipes, which can be helpful for you as well. It's just little samples of small interviews that do different things. It's a little bit random what the things are. It's things people asked about and wanted to learn about. And then these are little sample interviews that do the thing. Here, I'll show you like how these work. So something that's kind of nice about the documentation is you can see the sample code on the left, then you can click to run it. So here's a sample of having these little collapsible sections that appear inside a text. So I can actually click on it and run it and see how it works. That way, I can go back to the code to see the code and then try to reason through what it's doing here. Whenever you're working with a running interview and you're doing it on a development server, you're going to see the source button, which is another good friend to keep in mind. The source button lets you see the source of the page that you are currently on. So I can scroll down. You can see things like readability statistics. So this says this page was written to meet about a 5th and 6th grade reading level. I can see the source code for this exact question, this exact screen I'm on. And I also see what DocAssemble did to reach this screen. So it says how the question came to be asked. At the bottom of the screen is where I like to start usually, where it tells me what definition it needed. And that's usually at the very bottom. So it said it was looking for the definition of a variable called favorite explanation. Why did it ask this question? Well, I can see favorite explanation is mentioned on this screen. And that's why I needed that definition. You'll use this when you're running into errors or trying to trace some logic. And it's another place to see the source code of a question. In our assembly line process, there are a lot of questions that you did not have to write. So the source button is definitely your friend there if you wanted to make a change to those questions. You would use the source button. You could copy that code into your interview and customize it there in place. I actually don't think we'll get to practice that today, but it's definitely a skill that you'll use a fair amount if you want to make your interview look different to the way that we've chosen to make ours. All right. So let's try saving and running this interview now and seeing some things that we might want to change about it. All right. This is the question that's built in for everybody's projects. And you will probably want to change this branded page here to meet your organization. You'll do that by changing, as I said, you're going to have your own package and include that file rather than the mass access file. Here's something right away that I want to change, right? This is meant to be an introductory screen which has information about how I use this particular form. And it just has some kind of placeholder text. Let's try changing this so that it looks different. So when you're on our development server, you see this kind of debug information at the top of the screen. That is something that's part of our package. It's not built into DocAssemble, but it's something that you'll see if you're starting from our package. So I'm going to actually just highlight and copy this first line where it says ID : and then the name of the page, essentially. I'm going to copy that into my clipboard. I'm going to use that to locate this question and change it in my code. I'm going to switch back to the playground tab, put that, what I just copied, into the search bar, and that jumps me right to that screen. This is the first and most common kind of change you're going to make and a change that you'll have to make over and over and over again as you're working with subject matter experts who want to have different language that's used in the interview. And there are ways that we found to empower subject matter experts to make their own changes, but you'll definitely want to do this yourself too. So let's just try changing the question here to something a little bit more descriptive. Family law, let's say family law motion, multi-purpose. This is not actually a really great description either here. And now I'm going to, what would I want to do here is probably describe what the form is about and what someone needs before they get started to work on the form. So let's add a little bit of explanation here. I'm going to just add a little bit of information here. So one thing to notice is the indentation. The indentation is important in this YAML file. But DocAssemble kind of handles that for me automatically. When I hit enter, everything is indented correctly. And that indentation I can get manually by hitting the tab key or by hitting spacebar twice. The tab key in this editor inserts 2 spaces. Another thing I want to point out is if I want a new paragraph, you can see here that if I started typing too much text here, I'm going to have to start scrolling, or it does this weird line wrapping thing, which is kind of hard to read. I'm going to want to hit enter more often than I actually want a new paragraph. So in this editor, in order to get a new paragraph, I put an empty line between the 2 phrases, but I can continue the paragraph by just typing on a new line that doesn't have an empty line in between. All right, so I'm just going to put a little bit of placeholder information here. So before you start, this is not necessarily something, find your docket number, maybe something that might need to do about what you want to ask the court. Okay, so you might have chosen some other information there. By putting a number at the beginning of the line and then a period, this actually will automatically turn into a numbered list. So I don't need to do the 1 and 2. I could do 1 and 1, and it will get turned into a numbered list with the right numbers. To learn more about that, I could have gone to the formatting, which is actually the first example block that pops up there. Okay. I'm going to hit save. So this time I'm not hitting save and run, I'm just hitting the blue save button. And I'm going to refresh the screen and see if those changes were made. All right, so that is the first and most basic kind of customization. Let's keep going and think about something a little bit more complicated we might do. So this screen starts out by asking me if I'm the plaintiff or the defendant, which is a great thing to know in a form that can be used by a plaintiff or a defendant. We might want to change the language that we use later, depending on what the person says. This is a built-in question. It's not one that you had to write yourself. And you can see how it's responsive. And now the first screen that we got, if you use that package I uploaded, you'll see it's a little bit redundant to what we asked on the previous screen, right? I already answered that I was starting the case, which told me I was the plaintiff. On the next screen here, it doesn't really make sense to ask me that again. So I do see a bunch of chats. I just want to do a pause and make sure that, are any of those questions that we should answer live on the recording, or are we feeling?
There was some question about the details of how search works, whether it's context sensitive, but we covered that.
Case sensitive. Well, either way, okay.
And, and I was receiving some private messages that I think were more appropriate for working with when we do the breakout rooms.
Okay. Yeah, so we're gonna try to go through a couple of things you might need to do. I know we're limited on time, and I want to make sure people have time to work on their actual forms. So we won't get very deep into some of the things you can do, but hopefully that going over the documentation gives you a starting place. And we'll try one more complicated thing. So let's think about this question, the screen here. ID some questions about you. And one thing you can do in DocAssemble is use code to define questions. And I think that makes sense here, right? We've already asked for the person's role in the case. They told us that they're the defendant or the plaintiff already. So why don't we define the value of user as defendant, user as plaintiff with some code? And we can take that question out of the interview. All right, so notice here, and again, if you did the week 0, this will be familiar, but I know that some of you might not have, which is okay. So to create a new block, I'm just going to use these 3 hyphens in a row. Something that might happen is you start out with, when you hit enter, your line will be indented. You don't want to have that indentation, so make sure you delete any indentation DocAssemble puts in for you. Those 3 dashes should be at the beginning of the line. And I'm going to just type something here that will, I'll just give you what we're going to type, and we'll get to practice with it. And from experience and examples, it will start to make sense, I think. So I'm going to type the word code, C-O-D-E, then a colon and a space, and then a vertical pipe, which is right above the enter key on your keyboard if you hold down the shift key. That tells DocAssemble that what follows might be more than 1 line of text. So when I do that, it doesn't handle indentation for me automatically. I'm going to hit the tab key because it needs to be indented to say it's part of the code statement here. And let's think about what we want to do. So if the user is the defendant and the user is the plaintiff, we want to define both of those. And let's do it based on the question that is asked on the previous screen, which is, if I click source, I can learn what that is. We didn't create this question, so we might not know. If I click source, I can see what it's defining. So this question here defines the value of user ask role. And user ask role is a radio type question. You saw how that was the 2 radio inputs, and the choices are either plaintiff or defendant. Okay, so I am going to write out a statement that defines whether the user is the defendant, depending on whether the person is answered on the previous screen, whether they're the defendant or not. And you might already be thinking about a nuance of this that we can't cover here, which is, well, this asks about whether the defendant or the respondent or the petitioner or the plaintiff, which is a little bit different from just being the defendant. We won't handle that right now, but there's ways you can get to that later. So whether the user or the defendant is, let's write this a different way. So if user ask role, and I'm using a double equal sign here because I'm checking the value of user ask role. This was covered in the hello world. So if that doesn't make sense to you, that's okay, and we can practice it and reinforce it in the breakout group rooms, but I won't go over the explanation of it here. If user ask role is equal to the value of plaintiff, and user is defendant, it's going to be false. And here I'm using 1 equal sign, so I want to give user is defendant the value false. And user is plaintiff, we can say is equal to true, right? Now, what we're writing here is Python code. It is very simple Python code. It is about as complex as you need to get in writing Python code. There's not going to be very much more than you need to know besides if statements, the else statement, and the way that indentation works, which is pretty consistent with how it works throughout anything that you're doing in DocAssemble. We indent to say something is part of the statement above. So if this is true, we want a bunch of things to happen. They need to be indented at least 1 level to match, to say that they're part of the if statement. Else is what happens when this isn't true. I'm going to indent that as well. So it's really going to be the opposite of these 2 choices we made. So I'm just going to copy that and change it. Notice we didn't really think about how to handle petitioner and respondent yet. That's fine. But something that I've done, okay, I've written a code block that defines those two questions, those two fields rather. So now I can delete those from my question that was asked live. So I'm just going to highlight and delete those two fields, the field about plaintiff and the field about defendant. And now I've changed my interview so that it does not need to ask those questions. It uses it based on a previous question. All right, so I'm saving it and I'm going to refresh. And notice it no longer actually asks that question anymore. But it will come back again and it will just ask me about petitioner and respondent because I haven't taken care of those yet. Okay. On the what is your request page, if you remember, people had kind of asked, well, what is this emergency all about? Emergency is going to be either is something, again, where it doesn't really make sense to have it be something the person types. If we look back at the template, I'll just show you what that field looked like in the template. It's going to be the word emergency is going to be typed in here if it is an emergency. So we would want to ask that by having a true or false question. And then we want it to be put in the word emergency is going to appear there, depending on what the person's answer is. I'm seeing a bunch more chats, which makes sense. We're going over a bunch of stuff. Okay, so it's okay. We don't have to answer those yet because those have been answered in the chat. So one of the questions was, does the order of these blocks matter? It does not really matter where you put them in the file, except that if they're two blocks that do the same thing, docassemble uses the block that's lower down in the code. So that is something to keep in mind. If you want to override something that happens somewhere else, you just need to make sure it's lower in the file. And why does that matter? Remember, we're doing a bunch of things in these included files. That's considered the top of our document. Anything that's written after that is going to be overriding the stuff that's in the included files. But that is really very much a detail that you don't have to worry about too much right now. Okay, so we did a couple of things. We did some very basic changing of text. We did some much more complicated code, which I know that may not have made sense to everybody. Let's just go over the very basics of this interview order block and what that does. All right, so we have user ask role as the first question here in our interview order block. I'm going to jump there, by the way. Let me model this by just typing in the word ID interview order in the search box. And if you generated your code more recently, you'll see that we have added like a little flag here where there's a line of hashtags, which helps you find it a little bit more easily too. And let's just try changing the order of one of these questions so you can see how that works. Let's say we don't want to start with the question about what the user's role in the case. We want to know if it's an emergency. That seems important. So let's ask that first. In this interview order block, you'll see there's some things we don't need to change. We kind of start with this one here, user ask role. That's the first question that popped up to us that we wanted to interact with. And that's the first one we might change. Let's just move this word emergency so it comes before user ask role. So I cut that and put it on my clipboard, and now I'm going to paste it back here so it comes above user ask role. And now I can do a new save and run. Okay. So I start with those intro screens still. And I get right to this question here about the emergency nature of the form. Okay. One more point I wanted to make here. So why did we ask for emergency? And why is that the variable that got listed there? It's because it was the first field on the screen. In DocAssemble, we don't try to trigger screens. We try to trigger the definition of a variable. And if I wanted to have a different field trigger this screen, any of the 3 fields on the screen is something I could have listed there. So we asked for motion name, user request. If I changed emergency to that word, it would do the same thing. It still triggered that same screen. I didn't have emergency this time. I asked for the motion name instead, and it triggered the screen because this screen provides a definition of motion name. You might have defined motion name with code, and then you wouldn't see anything on the screen happen, but the value of the motion name would have been defined by that code block. That would have run, and it would go on to the next thing and try to define the next variable in that list. I want to highlight one more thing here before we go into the breakout rooms. So I want to make sure you have as much time as possible. I know we only covered a couple of different things, but I'm hoping in the breakout rooms, you'll all ask questions about different types of fields, other ways that you can do different kinds of customizations to your interview. And then we'll be able to report those back at the end. You could put if statements here as well. So let's say that we only need the motion name if the user role is plaintiff. And if I answered defendant, it skips that question. So I can use an if statement like this. And then what I'm putting underneath the if statement this time isn't defining something. I'm just mentioning that variable, just like the rest of the interview order block is doing. So you start to see what this interview order block does. It's your chance to see the branching logic of your interview, to control the order of questions, to control which questions get asked and which ones don't. And it is kind of the flow of your whole interview. So that's why we've kind of taken a practice of putting this all in one place. There's other ways to use DocAssemble. If you had done some experimentation with DocAssemble on your own, you might not have come upon this method of organizing the code, but it's the one that works for us. So you can see and control that order in a way that makes sense. So, so let's say I said I'm going to be the plaintiff, I'll get that motion in question. If I said I was the respondent or defendant, it jumps right to the hearing information questions. So you can see how that is being used to control not just the order, but which questions get asked and which ones don't get asked. All right. This was truly the rest of the OWL part of the description here. We hope that the breakout rooms today and next week will help everybody be able to ask the questions that really matter to them on their form. We could try to cover everything in DocAssemble. It wouldn't be possible to do that. We're just covering a couple of different things, and then the rest is going to come from what your needs are. So I'm going to stop the share here, and I think we're going to move into breakout rooms. We are going to try to reserve at least 15 minutes, I think, to share back what people learned and did.
Yeah, so it gives us till 12:45, so about 30 minutes. Also, this is like, they like just everyone take a breath, like it's okay. A bunch of people coming from different experiences. So we're going to try to make sure that someone who's familiar with DocAssemble is in each of the breakout rooms. We're going to, I'll be watching the chat primarily in Teams because that's the one that I'll see everywhere. Because you can't see the chats of people in individual breakout rooms. So if you have a general question that you want to ask people outside of your breakout room, put that in the Teams. I'll be watching that. And then also just like take a breath and like, it's okay. This is the on-ramp to the community. So don't expect that, as we said last week, that you come out of this session knowing everything. You're going to figure out what questions, you're going to figure out how to ask questions. And we really want to encourage people to ask questions, not just during this time, but you can ask questions in the Teams anytime that you're working on something between now and the next breakout session, and next bootcamp session. All right, Bryce, were you gonna do breakout rooms or should I?
I can make those.
So I think we're gonna want to let participants choose breakout rooms. That way we can have someone with let's see, we've got about 40 folks. So maybe 4 or 5 breakout rooms. I think that's about how many people we have with Who do we have here that's a docassemble person who can be in a room? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, okay. So yeah, like let's do 5 rooms, and then we'll each take one. So I'm gonna take, so for those people who are, let's just count off. Michelle, you do room 1, I'll do room 2, Bryce room 3, Joelle room 4, and Quentin room 5. All right, and then everyone else, just look to see how many people are in there and try to evenly distribute yourself. So look and see who's there, and then go. Oh, and I got bounced from the room.
How do you join a breakout room? I've never done that before.
Oh, there should be down at the bottom, there should be a little thing that says breakout rooms. You might have to make the menu bigger, or it might be under more. You click on breakout rooms, and then you'll see a list of breakout rooms.
In your Zoom.
In your Zoom, yeah, sorry. Should clarify what tool.
Is it along the bottom where it says participants?
Yeah,
right.
It should be there. If you don't see it,
don't. I see reactions, chat, share screen, record.
It's also possible you might have an older version of Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, the current version of Zoom is like, I'm trying to see if it tells me what version of Zoom. We're already to Zoom like 5.5. So you might need to quickly install a new version of Zoom, pop back on
Sure.
Sorry. But
I think I
I'm
have to
guessing
do
if you
that
don't,
too, because
if
I
you
don't
don't see
have
it, that's my guess.
I don't see it, no.
Yeah. And then hopefully you'll be able to join back. If you have problems, DM me on Teams, because that's where
I have no idea how to update my Zoom.
Yeah, so if you go up to, are you on a Mac or a PC?
PC.
PC.
I think.
Then probably up in the up in the file menu. There's probably under file on the Mac. It's under it's the Zoom US thing, and then one of the drop downs on the first menu is check for updates.
Okay, well, I'll leave and try and do that.
All right, good luck. You probably want to do the check for updates while you're still in Zoom. All right, I'm going to move over to room 2. The other folks who are still here, do you not know what rooms to join, or?
That statute, so he knows.
Right, I've restarted the recording since we're all coming now back here. Everyone will be back in 40 seconds. 37. Oh. So how are people? It's never as long as we want it to be. But I know in my group, we got to look at a form, and we even texted it to a phone and signed on the phone. That was a lot of fun. And we don't have that much time for people to report back. So Amanda, did you want to talk about our group? And well, actually, who was group 1? That was Michelle.
That was me. Yep.
What does your group want to say real quick?
Oh, I did not get a consensus. We went over, we made sure everyone's got the files they need in their playground, went over the if statement a bit and syntax there, what did and didn't work, what variables could be removed from a block because they were being defined lower down. So
cool. Yeah, and group 2, we went over what to do if you just uploaded your YAML and not the docx, or not the PDF. So we showed where you could upload template documents if you wanted to change them, which is nice, so that
You don't have to run something through the Weaver every time you change your template. And we talked a little bit about watching out for naming stuff before putting it through the Weaver, so you don't have duplicate variables that you then have to assign equal to each other. Because you really want them to be the same. Although that's a little touchy with PDF because you can't name the exact same variable name, but anyhow, details. And then anything I missed there? No. Group 3?
That was us. We also sort of went through some of the if syntax notation and sort of like what possible errors you might run into while just like syntaxing, like might be wrong in code or might be wrong in YAML and what to look for there. And then I think we had a few people who actually weren't able to make last week's session, and but also were interested in using docx's, and we sort of did a little bit off script, but did sort of how you might label a docx differently than PDFs. But.
Cool. Group 4.
We just talked about like mandatory fields and making those things optional. Adding questions, we broke it, we fixed it, worked through it. Yeah, that's it.
Group 5.
I know Quentin was running.
You muted Quentin.
I'm going to let Jack report back, which he's doing. That's all.
But I was the one who was taking notes. So we talked about a lot of really fun things. We went over some basic syntax error debugging, which was very fun. Helpful hint about actually being able to find exactly where your syntax error is. We looked at a form that someone had automated for a special process server. We're having a little bit of a trouble with repeating questions, so asking multiple times about user roles. We learned how to define user roles automatically or manually, so that the form doesn't actually have to ask every time if you already know it's going to be a plaintiff using this form. We also went over, and forgive me if I'm totally messing up the language on this, how to set the date as a function so that you can automatically set the date to today, for instance, in a form. And we looked at the undefined names why that's showing up for a lot of us in our forms, and learned not to worry about that, but also learned that the little hamburger list icon next to run up there is a very handy list of just about everything used in the form that's alphabetical, so you can find all the terms you're looking for and exactly where they're used. And then we took a look at a form I had automated, which I was having a similar kind of repeating name issue with multiple variables like username 1, username 2, when there was really only one user. And so figured out how to make it so we could reuse that field text instead of having to ask the user for their name a million times.
You guys weren't on methamphetamine, were you, or what?
No, I guess we're just very efficient.
Yeah, that's very
yeah,
like
covered a lot.
We definitely hit upon some of those issues, but did not come to resolutions.
We also covered how setting your labels up before putting your form into the Weaver is the most useful way to get what you want out of the Weaver. So that might be helpful to some people.
Yeah, we talked about the trade-off between the time you spend thinking about the things before they go in the Weaver and correcting them after, which is to say that like you can put something through the Weaver and you can change everything afterwards, but you're going to save yourself some time if you do that work up front of knowing sort of, naming things in a way that the Weaver will recognize, because that will save you time down the road. All right, so Quentin, did you want to finish this up?
Sure, and you know what? Just because it's so useful, the last tip that Jack gave about how to see your variables, I'm just going to show that live, just so everyone can see that again. All right, so here's what Jack was mentioning, this little icon right there. And the question came up about this undefined name, why. So in your playground, if you click this little list icon, you see a list of all of the variable names that are mentioned or used inside your interview, and it's alphabetized. So instead of even trying to search for why, I'm going to get emergency and like other key, those are going to come up first. I can just scroll down alphabetically till Y comes up. And I can see where it is mentioned. And the reason why it's popping up that way is because DocAssemble doesn't think it's defined. It's defined here. And I'm telling you, you don't have to worry about it, but this can be really useful when you're trying to find something else that you added yourself and is showing as missing or anything like along those lines. All right. Now, this was great. I know, like, I'd love to have seen like what everyone was doing in the different groups, but it's possible. Use the Teams channel, use the coding help channel, or the bootcamp, whatever was more comfortable for you. We had reserved some time here for next week. We're going to go over GitHub, and it will be another whirlwind of just getting your toes wet with GitHub. But do we want to try to maybe make sure everyone can create a GitHub account so that they're ready for that before next week? That was what we had planned. Open to other ideas, looking at you, David. But maybe that is a good time for us to start.
For things to do between now and then?
Between now and the next 5 minutes, I think maybe we could take a minute to make sure everyone has a GitHub account so that next week they'll come with a GitHub account ready.
We can provide those links.
Okay. All right. So let's try this. Do we have a volunteer who's willing to go through creating a GitHub account for us? You just have to share your browser, which only has the github.com window in it, if that's all you want. Someone who does not have a GitHub account yet.
I can volunteer.
All right, thank you so much, Marta. All right, so if you want to just click the share screen button, you'll be able to choose between sharing your whole screen or just one window.
Okay, can you guys see?
Yes.
That's great.
Perfect.
Yeah, and
you can see
that's a great way to start. You could just type, I saw you were typing Git, we could just type in GitHub and we'll get right to the github.com webpage. You could also just, and now let's go ahead and sign up. And I'm going to choose a username.
I will obscure the username and your email here. So
for the recording. Okay, perfect. Okay. And then, all right. Oh, at least 15 characters, or at least 8 characters, including a number. Okay.
You're green, so I think you're okay.
Okay.
I've never seen this CAPTCHA.
I don't know if I did. I don't know what a spiral galaxy looks like.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Create account.
All right, you did it. You made a GitHub account. So it is going to ask you to verify your account.
Mm-hmm.
You can skip this screen here where it says welcome to GitHub. You don't have to answer any of those questions. You can just click complete setup.
Okay, I have to do this.
See, that was so quick and easy. You will all be able to do the same thing, but maybe since we have 3 minutes, no, maybe that's too crazy. Can you show how to tie it in to get to DocAssemble or not?
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to jump off because I have another meeting right at 1.
We'll give everybody 3 minutes back, or we can use this as a time to ask any last minute question that someone has.
Or to reiterate what an amazing thing everyone has done. I know in our group, we got to the place where people had something to run through the Weaver and produce a form. Didn't look exactly the way they wanted or ask exactly the questions they wanted, but that's a great accomplishment. All right, then.
Well, great job, everybody. Thanks for coming, and we'll see everybody next week. We will try to have more breakout group time next week if we can, but it's always the hardest thing to make time for.